he did the best that he could do. It seems rather kind of illogical that an Indian man should do everything in English when English was actually only a second language here in India. So you would think, he would naturally want to preach it in Hindi or Bengali, etc. He did do a little of that also. Some of his godbrothers had, some monthly publications that they were putting out, and Prabhupada would write some article and that would be printed. But the task of translating his books into, or at least creating his books, translating the Sanskrit and then doing the synonyms and the word-for-word transliterations, and then of course the translation of the verse itself. So Prabhupada had no one to help him with that, but at the same time he was determined that he would do it because his spiritual master had requested it. We'll come to that very shortly. But as I travel with Prabhupada, of course, I got a chance to sometimes reciprocate with him on a more intimate level than we would do if we was listening to the Srimad Bhagavatam class or even on a morning walk. In Prabhupada's rooms, there was more opportunity to speak with Prabhupada on a more informal level. And sometimes he would reveal to us little insights into what it took for him to begin his ISKCON mission. So October 1976, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. We had one English devotee, Akshaya Prabhu, who was Prabhupada's door guard. When Prabhupada was translating at night time, Akshaya would sleep outside the Prabhupada's doorway into his his translation area, and so he happened to be reading a copy of the original Bhagavatam that Prabhupada first put out in the 1960s. So that the first canto was done in three volumes, and so Akshaya had one of those volumes. So I was interested in seeing that, and I had to scan through it, and then that kind of prompted me to try to find out more about what Prabhupada was doing. So this morning I showed Prabhupada a photo taken of him on the day that he accepted sannyas. That's a famous photo now, but in those days it was very difficult to get photos like that of that occasion. So Prabhupada is standing to the right of the photo. A godbrother is seated in the center, and another sannyasi is standing to the left. Prabhupada smiled when he saw it, but he didn't think that it was a good photo. He told me he was looking at it. He said, "This is not such a nice photo." He told me that he had taken sannyas from the godbrother in the center, Keshava Maharaj, who was the same age as himself. The other devotee was older, and he had also taken sannyas from Keshava Maharaj on the same day. So it was an opportunity for me to relish Prabhupada's earlier pastimes, which I love to do. And I took as much advantage of it as I could. So I'd shown Prabhupada that photo, and we also had that copy of the original Bhagavatam. And I asked whether, as Harikesh Maharaj had told me, that whether Prabhupada had been gored by a cow the day before he took sannyas. So there was a story going around that Prabhupada was in Chandi Chowk. He stopped to pet a calf, a baby cow. The mother got angry and charged him and gored him in the stomach and knocked him flat on his back. So Harikesh was thinking that that happened the day before Prabhupada took sannyas. Actually, Prabhupada said, no, it wasn't then. He had that incident had happened, but three years earlier, you know, from the time that he took sannyas. So Prabhupada laughed and he shook his head. He said that incident had occurred in Delhi in 1956, 3 years before. Prabhupada was in an amiable mood, and he shared a few details of his struggles in the 1950s. He said that he was living in Delhi as a Vanaprastha, but my paper was going on, Back to Godhead, he said. In Delhi, I was alone. I was doing everything, editing, selling, collecting, cooking, everything. So it seems like when Prabhupada finally left home and officially took Vanaprastha, he moved to Jhansi, and he was still using the Back to Godhead English format as his main vehicle for preaching. But because he had no money, he had no friends, he had no helpers, it was very difficult to get, you know, a regular flow of writing and, you know, then distributing it, etc. So I had to look through to see if I could see how many Back to Godheads were going out every year. In 1944, this is of course when the first Back to Godhead magazine came out. There were two issues in 1944. Then in 1952, there was 2 issues. Then in 1956, he got 12 issues out. And in 1958, he got 2 issues. And finally in 1960, then he got 11 issues out in 1960. After that time, then he stopped actually writing the Back to Godhead, not because it was not effective, but it was because he had another task that he wanted to work on, and that was the production of books. So on the 20th of January 1976, we were in Mayapur, and Prabhupada was chit-chatting with myself and Madhvisa Swami and others. And in the evening, he told us more about his life before establishing ISKCON. He explained that when he began publishing Back to Godhead, many people had appreciated it, including his godbrother Bon Maharaj and others. So one librarian friend, he asked him, why don't you write books? A paper is thrown away, but a book is kept. So Prabhupada took that as an indication from Krishna. He stopped working on the newspaper style, Back to Godhead, and he started to work on translating the Bhagavatam. But before he did that, the first book that Prabhupada brought out in 1958, I believe, he wrote The Easy Journey to Other Planets. So that was his first attempt at doing a book. It's more like a pamphlet, but it's a bit more substantial than just distributing the Back to Godhead in a newspaper format. So Prabhupada moved into the Radha Damodar temple around about 60, 61, and he lived there for about 4 years. He had a lease on the place, 5 rupees a month. And he was then spending most of his time after that time working on the Bhagavatam. So he managed to publish the first part in 1962. In 1963, there was part 2, and by the end of 1964, part 3. So each printing was 1,100 copies, and the cost for publishing was donated by a wealthy big business magnate. So that three volumes from 60, 61 up until 1965. That was the first canto. Now there's 11 cantos in the Bhagavatam, of course. And if you look at what Prabhupada was attempting to do, it's kind of amazing. I mentioned that this morning. that if it took 4 years to translate the first canto, then there's 11 more to go. If you do the calculation, on average of let's see, 4 years per canto, then 11 times 4 is 44. So that's 44 years to finish off all the other cantos. So that means Prabhupada was already in his late 60s. So that means that practically speaking, he would have, if he continued at the pace that he was going, it would have been about 1912, yeah, he would have been about 114 years old by the time he had completed his task. So obviously, any logical person would think, how is that possible? And in fact, sometimes when they heard about what he was trying to do, some of the acquaintances that he had, they would discourage him, that it's such a big job. How on earth are you going to manage this? So in the Bhagavatam Volume 2, so he'd done Volume 1, he was out selling it, then he sold it to one of his friends. And in the beginning of the preface of Volume 2, Prabhupada writes about a little debate that he had with one of his friends. So he says, an unbeliever friend became astonished to learn that we have taken up the mighty project for presenting 60 volumes of 400 pages each, simply for the matter of glorifying the Lord. But we should not forget to remember that the Lord is unlimited. This material world is a fragmental portion of his unfathomable glories, out of which this tiny earth is a particle only. And on the surface of the earth, there are numerous cities, and in each and every one of them, there are hundreds of printing houses, all engaged in the matter of broadcasting the message of this limited space. So we can just imagine how many hundreds and thousands of volumes we may need to glorify the activities of the unlimited Lord. Therefore, 60 volumes of just the sample distribution of his glories, presented in a manner understandable to the stagnant brain of the residents of this insignificant globe. Otherwise, the residents of higher planets, who have got superior brains than men, do go through thousands and millions of volumes of the Srimad Bhagavatam to know about the glories of the Lord. So that was Prabhupada's response, that you think that I'm doing an overwhelming task, but compared to what's really going on in the universe, what I'm doing is peanuts. Prabhupada, at least theoretically, had that vision of the whole universe, where so many different pastimes glorifying the Lord are going on. So what he was doing in presenting the Bhagavatam here in India in the 60s, that was a small attempt as far as Prabhupada was concerned. And Krishna would help him. He would get inspired, by Krishna, as we'll see. But this preface that Prabhupada writes here is so it's so significant. Both it says so much about Srila Prabhupada himself as a person and his determination, and it says so much about his full surrender and inspiration that he was getting internally from various great personalities in our parampara. So anyway, back October the 3rd, 1976, I was showing Prabhupada this first canto that we found in this picture of himself getting sannyas. So I asked if his godbrothers were helping him in any way. Prabhupada said, I did not take. They wanted, but I didn't like. So I asked him, did you ever think at that time that you would be able to expand? So he said, I was trying to do it. That was a struggle at that time. At that time, I lived with some of my godbrothers, but I didn't like, and I left their temples and I was living alone. Then in that Imlital in Vrindavan, Sevakunj, there is my godbrother's temple. So he had a temple in Delhi, Karolbagh. So I left Jhansi, I came to Mathura, I lived there for a few months, and then I went to Delhi. So in this way, here and there. So I told him that Akshaya Prabhu had been reading one of his original India printed Bhagavatams, 1:1. And Prabhupada said, and I was looking at, and I said, I was looking at the front of the book, and it gives your residence in Vrindavan, at Radha Damodar, and it gives the address of your office in Delhi. So Prabhupada tipped his head from side to side. He said it was not unpleasant. When I was living alone, doing everything, it was not unpleasant. It was very nice. Alone, everything I was doing. Rather, I had not so much anxiety for management. Somebody was asking about management the other day. So this is one way to be peaceful. If you want to be peaceful, then avoid getting involved in management. Go out and preach. Prabhupada preferred it sometimes. He said, I didn't have to worry about so many temples and so many devotees and training them and what have you. I was quite happy on my own. So he said that his youngest son, Vrindavan Day, had come to live with him, but he had not liked that. I said, no, you don't. So they sent my family to go and for him to go and live with me. So he came twice or thrice. So the reason is that I asked him, if you want to live with me, then you have to live like a sannyasi brahmachari. So after Prabhupada took sannyas, and then the family heard that he had taken sannyas, Vrindavan Chandra, he said that it was like a thunderbolt to them. They were used to him not being there, but he was still bringing in money and supporting the household. But when he took sannyas, that was cut. So then they were in big anxiety about that. And I guess to reduce the amount of money, etc., that they needed to run their household, then Vrindavan Chandra Day, he was sent by the family to stay with Prabhupada, even though Prabhupada had already taken sannyas. And Prabhupada told him, all right, you can come, but only if you live like a sannyasi brahmachari situation. And so he couldn't do that, and he went back to Calcutta. So he said twice or thrice they sent him, and I said, no, you don't, you go back. So Prabhupada got to a point where he was very determined not to get sucked into any more household affairs of one way or another. So Prabhupada went on, he said, otherwise I left home in 1950. From 50 to 54, I lived in Jhansi. So I had noticed in this old Bhagavatam, it was published by the League of Devotees. And I had also heard that he started the League in Jhansi. So I asked if that was so. Prabhupada acknowledged that at that time there were many students. They were not my disciples, but they were coming, like that Prabhakar. So this is a fellow that actually got initiated by Prabhupada. He was the leader of this group of students. So Prabhupada, he told me, you remember that Prabhakar? I'd seen him. I said, yes. So he was the head, Prabhupada said. So I asked if he was teaching Vaishnavism, and Prabhupada said, yes. I wanted to start from there. It was a very nice big house. But this Munshi, K. Munshi's wife, he was the chief minister at that time, whatever, UP, I guess, or whatever. Whoever was in charge in Jhansi with the government. So Mr. Munshi's wife, she wanted to have the building that Prabhupada was in for herself. So in this, just very, indiscreetly, very discreetly, she let it be known that she wanted that house. And there was one gentleman that had a cinema house, and every year he had to go and get his license to run it renewed. So Mrs. Munshi, she let it be known that if you don't give this building to my use, she had some women's club or something going on. If you don't yeah, if she told the collector that if you don't give this building, then you will not get your license renewed for the cinema. So Prabhupada had some friends, there were some lawyers, and they told him, no, you don't go, we shall arrange. But then I thought, I've left my home, and for this reason I am going again to litigation. I don't want this house. Let her do something. So that was it. Prabhupada used that as an excuse, really, to, not stay in Jhansi any longer. And that was, and Keshava Maharaj had offered him, why don't you come and live in Mathura at our temple? So Prabhupada took him up on that. So I was still curious as to what the League of Devotees actually was. So I asked him that some God brothers that joined up with you, or was it just helpers or what? So Prabhupada said, no, after leaving Jhansi, I went to this God brother, pointing to the photo of Keshava Maharaj. I lived there for a few months. Then I went to another God brother, that Imli Tal in Delhi. Then I left there. I used to live alone in Delhi. Then I took one house in Kasigat. And then the Radha Damodar men, they called me and they said, you can live here. We'll give you 2 rooms. We won't charge. We give you the place. So I came to Radha Damodar, and from Radha Damodar temple, I went to the USA. So I was trying to find out who this League of Devotees were. Twice I'd kind of asked, and Prabhupada, responded, but he didn't tell me exactly what the League really was. So I said, well, I was just wondering what exactly the League of Devotees was. So Prabhupada started smiling. He said, oh, the League. So he said, I was trying to collect some devotees. Some of them, they were medical students. So they came and they used to live with me. But still, I lived there for 2 years, from 54 to 56. I had some surgical operation and they were taking care. So this Prabhakar, they were not full-time, they were students, that's all, and they were living with me. But your Bhagavatams, I asked him, it says that they were published by the League of Devotees. Does that just mean yourself, or there were others? Prabhupada started laughing. He said, League of Devotees, that was my organization. Therefore, I gave it that name, League of Devotees. I alone was doing. Oh, I said, but actually it was just you. I was trying to understand who it could be. So Prabhupada, Prabhupada said, yeah, I am everything at that time. There were some students, but there were not any active. I was doing everything. The League of Devotees means I am everything. I wanted to organize with this Prabhakar Mishra and others, but they were not interested to devote full time. Just like Prabhakar still comes to see me, but if you ask him to do some full-time work, that he'll not do. Therefore, I did not initiate the others. He was initiated. I gave him the name Haridas, but they were all learned scholars, Sanskrit. So at that time, of course, Prabhupada was a householder, Vanaprastha, but he started initiating. He gave to Prabhakar, but Prabhakar was interested in other things, so he didn't take it very seriously. And Prabhupada didn't give any initiations until 1966, when he was alone in New York. So Prabhupada said they were the others, they were practicing medical men, medical students. Now they are practicing. So they came, long time it has passed. That was in 54 or 55, no, say 54. So 20 years passed, or more than 20 years. So that was Prabhupada's attempt. If you look at the constitution and the rules and regulations of the League of Devotees, you'll see that there's objectives, aims and objectives there that are very similar to what Prabhupada eventually formed ISKCON. The basis of it was from the legal structure that he had created for the League of Devotees. So Prabhupada was working, but somehow or another it was struggle, 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 not much happening. So it's practically he spent the whole of the 1950s trying to preach, trying to make devotees, going here and there, doing his Back to Godhead magazine, but nothing was apparently, coming out as a result of that. And Prabhupada was not a man to be discouraged. So, as I mentioned, apart from the fact that Prabhupada was very qualified in terms of it, doing it, the work, the writing. He was top in his class as a student in English. He was top of his class in Sanskrit as a student, and he had this inspiration from his spiritual master to. Twice he'd been told to go out and preach in the English language. So Prabhupada was in London July 26, 1976. And whilst he was there, Bhagavan Prabhu, he was a GBC at that time, he came to see Srila Prabhupada. They'd heard that Prabhupada was sick and that he may not continue on as planned from London to Paris, and that he may fly directly back to India. So they had been working on a new book. So he and this sannyasi, Prabhu Swami, French, they had come to see Prabhupada in London, and they delivered to him the very first printing of the Srimad Bhagavatam first canto, part 1, in the French language. And when Prabhupada saw that, he was so happy. So he talked a little bit about, the book, etc. And then whilst we were doing that, Hari Kesha was Prabhupada's new secretary at that time. He came in to see, what they'd been doing there in France. And then gradually, one by one, the devotees that were in his room left to go and do some service. So I remained for a few minutes more alone with Srila Prabhupada. So during the conversation, I had flipped through the pages of the new book, the French Bhagavatam, and I had noticed a picture of Srila Prabhupada's kitchen in the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan. So now I told Prabhupada about that they put this picture there. Now at that point, the standard for the Bhagavatam was that Prabhupada would not allow photographs, but only, oil paintings of the different scenes from the Bhagavatam, canto by canto. So Prabhupada was a little bit strict on that side as far as his English publications were concerned. But with the other foreign languages, like French, he was a little bit more lenient. So they had put in these pictures, a couple of photographs of Prabhupada's kitchen at the Radha Damodar temple. So when I told Prabhupada, oh, they put this picture, Prabhupada became a little enthusiastic. He said, oh, where is this? So I found the photo of him. Opportunities like this don't arise frequently. So as he inspected the brownish photo, I asked a few questions about Prabhupada's life before ISKCON. So through that window, you could see Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, I said. And from those two rooms, the temple owners were charging 5 rupees a month. Yes, Prabhupada said, these rooms were broken. So they told me, you can repair these, and whatever you like, you can give. So I thought, I don't need much space. Before me, there was a tenant in that other room. He was paying 3 rupees. So I thought, if I get 2 rooms, but I have to spend some money, so I'll give him 5 rupees a month. Now I'm giving them 10 rupees to retain it. So sometimes the devotees, I said, they go down there and they clean out your rooms. And they have a kirtan there sometimes. I think this is the first book that somebody included this photo. Prabhupada tipped his head. He said, yes, it was very calm and quiet. And people used to offer obeisances from outside because they knew, practically everybody knew me. So they would come to offer their obeisances. So people visiting the temple on a daily basis. They knew this old sannyasi was resident. They would come up to the window on the other side of the Prabhupada's rooms, and they would offer their obeisances and then go on their way. So I asked Prabhupada, "What were you?" I said, "You were very well known in Vrindavan before you came to the West." "Not very well known," Prabhupada said, "but people knew me." "Because you were writing?" "Yes." "Or because of your ambition to come to the West?" "No, at that time," Prabhupada said, "there was no such thing. I was living there, retired man." So I said, "When you went to Vrindavan, you'd given up the hope of coming to the West?" Prabhupada said, "No, coming to the West, the idea was there, but I was planning how to do it, how to get there, how to go there, how to preach there, how to take some books, how to bring them with me. So everything alone." So I said, "As soon as you have some books, then you were ready?" So he said, "Yes." Then I decided everything was being dictated by superior. And that's a key comment that Prabhupada makes there, that everything was being dictated by superior. So with Srila Prabhupada in such a congenial mood, I took the courage to broach something that Harikesh had once mentioned to me. So when I joined Prabhupada's party in November, December of 75, Harikesh had mentioned to me one day that Rupa Goswami had personally appeared before Srila Prabhupada and given him some instruction and inspiration for preaching in the West. But he didn't know any details about it, Harikesh. And it's not something you can just decide, all right, I'm going to go in and sit down and ask Prabhupada, "Hey, can you tell me what you were doing in the Radha Damodar Mandir?" So I just thought, if ever the opportunity comes, then I'll try and find out more about this incident with Rupa Goswami. So later on in the year, we're here in France, and the picture of the Radha Damodar is there, the Bhagavatam's there. And so I brought this issue up about Rupa Goswami. So I told Prabhupada, I said, "I was told that one day you were told by Rupa Goswami that you must go," means to the West. And Prabhupada's mood immediately slightly changed. He said, "But that was an open secret," he said dismissively. "Everybody knew." And then he changed the subject. So that's as much as I ever found out. Prabhupada had confirmed by saying that everybody knew that. He had confirmed that there was such a meeting with Rupa Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, but he didn't give any indication of what was spoken there or anything. So for about 20 years after when I first heard about this was in 76, for about 20 years, I never heard a single word about this incident of this, Rupa Goswami seeing Prabhupada in the Radha Damodar. And then one of my god sisters, she was researching a book, interviewing people that used to know Prabhupada before he came to the West, before ISKCON. So her book is out. It's called Our Srila Prabhupada, A Friend to All. So she had interviewed a gentleman called Gopal Chandra Ghosh of the Vrindavan Research Institute. When Prabhupada was living in the Radha Damodar, this young fellow, he was a student at that time, he would come and sometimes sit with Srila Prabhupada and chat with him. And sometimes, he would see him working, always working and writing. So in his interview, Gopal Chandra, he mentions about this incident with Rupa Goswami. So he says, "There were several times I recall him telling me about his Gurudev. Once he had a fever and he was sitting covered with a cloth and a blanket, reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. I bowed my head to his feet and I asked, 'You are not feeling well?' So he said, no, I have a cold. So this little medicinal cure, this will help. So the next day when I returned, he was happy, healthy, and was writing, maybe a commentary I did not see. So I asked him, today you're feeling better? So he answered very mysteriously, oh yes. So I asked him again, because he knew that Prabhupada wasn't saying everything. I asked him again, and he said, at night, my Prabhupada came to me in my dream. He encouraged me, saying, you work like Narottam Das Thakur, like Srinivas Thakur, Acharya, and like Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. Swami Maharaj told me joyfully, I have received the mercy from my Gurudev. He has blessed me and he has given me power. I was in too much anxious for the Bhagavatam commentary. So he said, you just write and all the 6 Goswamis will help you. So he also mentioned then that his Gurudev had come in front of him in sannyas dress 2 or 3 times when he had been sickly. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he was linking Prabhupada up with all the great acharyas in our line. So Gopal Chandra Ghoshi goes on, he says, during these months, when I would visit him in his rooms at Radha Damodar, he occasionally told me some special things that I understood as secrets in his bhajan. Once I came early in the morning in wintertime. He was chanting Harinam very deeply, and I saw tears coming from his eyes. When I inquired several times for him to tell me anything, he said that he had just received a visit last night. In the courtyard by Srila Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, he saw some very beautiful persons. One was wearing only kopin and was chanting on a large tulsi mala around his neck. His eyes were large like lotus flowers, and he was extremely effulgent. Also coming there was another personality, similarly dressed, but older and taller, and very kindly to him. And behind them, there was a much younger sadhu, whose beauty and sweetness was captivating. Swami Maharaj told me that they were Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatan Goswami, and their nephew, Srila Jiva Goswami. So he said that they spoke to him and gave him mercy and guidance for his writing and for his future preaching. I tried to ask more, but this is all he would tell me. So that's a recollection from somebody that was seeing Prabhupada on a regular basis in the Radha Damodar in the 1960s there. So it's very clear that, you know, something extraordinary was going on with Srila Prabhupada. He wasn't just trying to sell a few newspapers. Prabhupada had ambitions to go all over the world. So actually, there's a funny, interesting story about one of Prabhupada's godbrothers. When Prabhupada was living in Allahabad, which is now again Prayagraj. He used to meet up sometimes with Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor, who was about 6 years younger than Prabhupada, but they were close friends. So Dr. Kapoor, he had, you know, some kind of sniffling and a bit fluey and like that, cold. So Prabhupada saw him and he said, oh, you've got a cold. I'll give you some, what's the word? Not liqueur, like a liqueur. He said, I'll give you some medicine for fixing that cold. So Dr. Kapoor, he said, well, then I thank you very much. I shall take it. But he said, I want to know what you're taking. And so Prabhupada laughed. Dr. Kapoor had said, I'd like to know what you're taking. And if you like, you can give me some of that. And Prabhupada said, what is that? And he said, the potion that gives you pure love of Godhead. So Prabhupada replied, he said, I don't have such a potion. But he said, I know the recipe. So he said, I shall take that recipe and I shall preach it all around the world. So this is in the early 1930s. There's no question of, Prabhupada traveling at that point all around the world. But Dr. Kapoor, when I made this interview with him, he told me, he said, at the time I couldn't understand what he was saying, that he would, take this medicine all around the world. He said, now I understand that even then in 1930s, he was thinking about, a very much wider scheme of things for printing his books and distributing them. So one quick point on this interview with Gopal Chandra Ghosh. You do have to be, if somebody's gathering up information, doing research, you do have to be careful about the sources of your information. An example of this is from Prabhupada's, from the Prabhupada Leelamrita, A Lifetime in Preparation. So in the very last paragraph of that particular volume, there's mentioned one Shishya Bhattacharya, who describes Prabhupada's departure on the Jaladuta to go overseas for the first time. So Mr. Bhattacharya, this is from Leelamrita, Mr. Bhattacharya and Bhaktivedanta Swami took a taxi to the Calcutta port. Bhattacharya says he was alone, a lone fighter. When he left, there was no one on the shore to bid him goodbye. No friends, no supporter, no disciples, nobody. Even if you call me, I was not a disciple of his. I was a disciple of someone else. So I was not his follower. But due to shared love, I had very much respect for him. So I was the only person standing on the shore to say him goodbye. Nobody was with me. I could not know that it was such an important thing. So the only problem with that, that for me was one of the most vivid descriptions that I read in Leelamrita. Prabhupada, setting out, as the intrepid, distributor of pure love of Godhead, all by himself with nobody else to see him off, etc. Sounds very romantic. Unfortunately, it's not true. So in I think the late 80s or early 90s, the Bhaktivedanta archives, they had collected Prabhupada's own personal diary from that period. So Prabhupada was keeping notes every day. Who was it that was asking this morning? If you want to remember something, write it down. Anyway, so when I looked at this new publication of Prabhupada's own diary that had been put out by the archives, you get an entirely different picture. So August the 12th, Thursday, 1965, to start for the USA by M.V. Jaladuta from Calcutta Port, King George's Dockyard. So this is Prabhupada's writing. And then August the 13th, Friday, today at 9 a.m., embarked on the M.V. Jaladuta. Came with me, Mr. Bhagwati, the Dawan of Sindhya Sanshir, Mr. Sengupta, Mr. Ali, and Brindaban. Brindaban was Prabhupada's youngest son. So the cabin is quite comfortable. Its owners, it is the owner's residence, and therefore the sitting room, the bedroom, and the bath and privy are all equipped with first-class materials. Everything is very nice in the first-class compartment, and thanks to Lord Sri Krishna for his enlightening Srimati Maharaji for all these arrangements. I am quite comfortable. So that's Prabhupada's record for the same incidents when he gets on board the boat and sets sail. No mention of this Bhattacharya by Prabhupada. At least 5 people are there in the list that he does write down, and this Mr. Bhattacharya is not one of them. So, you'll meet people, oh, I once met your guru, he was very intimate with me, he shared some secrets with me, blah, blah, blah. So you have to be very careful when you're collecting information, especially biographical, that what you collect is verifiable. Yeah. Okay, so one last entry here. We mentioned about the inspiration Prabhupada was getting from Rupa Sanatan, Jiva Goswami, from his own Gurudev, etc. So we had sometimes heard that Prabhupada would say that this is not actually my writing. I'm just like a microphone, a mouthpiece that Krishna is speaking through. So I actually heard him say this in Vrindavan on September the 4th, 1976. After class, myself and Harikesh Swami were sitting with Srila Prabhupada in his darshan room. So he was discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, verse 3:25-21. Does anybody know what that one is? 3:25-21. I don't know whether you're probably on mute. Anyway, we were discussing the Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada had Harikesh read this out aloud, this particular verse. And it's a famous verse, of course. Ajata Shatrava Shanta Sadava Sadhu Bhushanaha. The symptoms of a sadhu are that he is tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies, he is peaceful, he abides by the scripture, and all his characteristics are sublime. So Prabhupada smiled in satisfaction. He said, this is a sadhu, not just wearing the dress. Then he had Harikesh read out the lengthy purport. And at the end of it, Prabhupada said, so the description of the sadhu is there. It is very nice. Where will they find this description all over the world? So complimenting Prabhupada, Harikesh said, well, I think that there's only one person who's following that description. But Prabhupada was in a different mood. He humbly appreciated the words of the Shastra. He said, no, I say about the Bhagavat's description, how perfect it is in every subject matter. And then he provided a revealing insight into the source of his own words in the purport. He said, I have tried to explain what is there in the Bhagavatam, to expand it. So that is not my explanation, that is Krishna's explanation. I cannot explain it now. At that moment, I could explain. So that means it is Krishna's. I can understand that the description is very nicely given. Although it is my writing, I know it is not my writing, it is Krishna's writing. So we should read the Bhagavatam always, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. We should not waste our time. So this is not the first time that Prabhupada has said that when he writes, he's simply acting as a mouthpiece for Krishna. His words and humility today merely emphasized his role as the transparent via media between us and Lord Krishna, and gave us another glimpse into the intimacy of his relationship with the Supreme Lord. And one other reference along the same lines, because that with Harikesh, that was what, September, I think, 76. So June 26, 1977, to all intents and purposes, Prabhupada had stopped his preaching at that point. He was seriously ill. Physically, he couldn't travel anymore. Tamal Krishna Maharaj had been made Prabhupada's permanent secretary. And when I left Prabhupada's party, that was middle of March 1975. So I'd been keeping my handwritten diary, and then you know, I got to a point where I felt that I needed a break. I can say it was Krishna's arrangement, but anyway, I talked with Prabhupada, and I told him that, you know, I'd like to, not that I'd like to go and preach exactly, but I was just feeling that now my time as Prabhupada's servant was coming to an end, and that others were going to come in that were more qualified to look after him. So this is on June 26, 1977, TKG's diary. So I had gone on the day that I left Prabhupada in March here in Mayapur. No, what's that? I had gone to see Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and I told him, look, I've been keeping this diary. So now I'm going, there's nobody here to continue on, you know, keeping notes and observations, etc. So I think that you have to do this. So initially he wasn't very enthusiastic. He said, but I have so much things to do, I can't, you know, put so much time into something like a diary. But I told him, I said, Maharaj, this is very important. Whatever we know about Srila Prabhupada, we've got bits and pieces here and there, but there's so much stuff, classes, conversations, activities, etc., that people don't know about. You know, we get a chance as on Prabhupada's personal party to see things that most devotees, you know, have no access to. So I think that we have to, you have to keep this up. This is very important, and keep up this diary. So he said, all right. He said, I'll try, but that was as much as he would commit himself to. Fortunately, about a month later, if you read TKG's diary, I think around about April 9th or 10th or something like that, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he realized the importance of keeping a diary of events with Srila Prabhupada, and he started writing down every day what was happening with Prabhupada's rooms, etc. So on June 26th then, I was back in Australia, but Tamal Krishna Maharaj had taken up the task of keeping this diary. So in the evening, when I expressed my appreciation for Prabhupada's books, Srila Prabhupada began to cry. This is Tamal Krishna. And he said, I am only a child, but I have tried to please my Guru Maharaj. I have not written. It is Krishna, Krishna and my Guru Maharaj. So that was something from Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Okay, so I think I'll put we'll stop at this point. How much more time have we got?
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
What time are we going till?
We can go up to 8:30, or we can go afterward also, no issue.
It's 8:25 right now.
Yeah. Prabhuji, devotees are asking for if you can share some of the.
You were breaking up there. I didn't hear the last sentence.
Devotees are requesting if you can share some of interactions with His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj also.
Okay, yes. What can I say? He was, you know, a wonderful personality. I don't believe he was ever conditioned. I say that with, you know, heartfelt conviction. When he came a little later than most of the devotees, towards, I think, the end of 75 or 76. I remember Jayapataka Maharaj had sent a report, or given a verbal report, to Srila Prabhupada after the opening of the Hyderabad temple. And he mentioned to Prabhupada that this very nice young man had come to join ISKCON. He was a university graduate, very gentle person, but very intelligent. So he was engaging him in translating Prabhupada's books into Bengali. So we heard like that. I heard, you know, him discussing. And then later on, when Prabhupada came to Mayapur in early 77, then this young man was there, Kishore was his name. And as I say, he was a little bit older than the rest of us, I think. At least he was 5 or 6 years older than me. Immediately, you know, he came on, he immediately came under Prabhupada's shelter. You could tell he was special. There was not many devotees like him. It was like he was permanently fixed in Suddha Sattva. No anger, no, you know, showboating as we call it, but just very humble attitude. Prabhupada liked him immediately. It was just at the time when I left the party in mid-March, and Prabhupada had Bhakti Charu Maharaj, Kishore, come and help with looking after him. He had become bedridden. So the old system of having a secretary and a servant, that was rearranged so that we could be with Prabhupada 24 hours a day. And Prabhupada immediately wanted Bhakti Charu Maharaj to cook for him because he was a Bengali. Now, Maharaj didn't know how to cook actually, so Prabhupada had to, train him up how to cook. But he didn't mind that, it took some training. He liked him, and he wanted him to stay with him on his party as much as possible. So that was in March, I guess, April. Prabhupada went to Rishikesh in mid-year. There was a sudden emergency. He came back to Vrindavan, and that was near the end of May. He gave some instructions about initiations after he left, about publications for Back to Godhead, etc. Not Back to Godhead, BBT, etc. And at the Gaur Purnima festival, just going back a little bit, at the Gaur Purnima festival, Prabhupada had given double initiation to Kishore. So Kishore became Chirachora Gopinath, and he was given his Diksha also. So Nam and Diksha in one go. And then, like a few weeks later, practically, then he was there again in Vrindavan. And there were two other devotees. One of them, his name was Bhakti Chaitanya. Well, not Bhakti Chaitanya at that time. He was initiated in sannyas with that name. And there was one fellow, Bhakti Prem. So he was a Mayavadi actually, but he was very knowledgeable. He had a PhD in Sanskrit, and again, a kind of gentle person. So Prabhupada decided to give sannyas to the three of them. So I think, what was that? I haven't got my notes with me, but I think that was early June. Is that correct? Either late May or early June.
Yeah, it's in June.
Huh?
It's in June, Snan Purnima.
Okay. So Prabhupada, gave Bhakti Charu Maharaj sannyas on that day. So within a period of like 5 or 6 months, he got all 3 initiations. And later on, and I'm working on this now actually, or at least I'm supposed to be, I kept another diary, the one that you've seen, that transcendental diary, that goes or will go up to March of '77 when I left Prabhupada's party and went back to Australia. But I had booked in with Tamal Krishna Maharaj to be a visiting GBC secretary for the month of October. So that was just another system Prabhupada had, that he would have a permanent secretary, and then he would have a visiting GBC secretary. And any GBC could book in for 1 month just to spend time with Srila Prabhupada and get his association. So I had booked in to come for October of 1977. And when I arrived in Bombay, Prabhupada, he had just come back from his last trip to London, Vyasa Puja and Janmashtami, and then he came back to Bombay, and he was there for about 3 weeks. They were working on getting the temple ready for the opening, and Prabhupada was, just basically immobile at that point. His bodily condition had deteriorated, and so I arrived in Bombay, I think September the 28th, early morning. In the late afternoon, we were all called into Srila Prabhupada's room, and we had to say whether we thought Prabhupada should stay in Bombay or whether he should go back to Vrindavan. So there was about 7 or 8, maybe more, devotees in the room, all the senior men. Brahmananda was there, Kaladri was there, Tamal Krishna, Abhiram was there, myself, Upendra Prabhu, and several others. So we had to, each one of us, say whether we thought Prabhupada should stay in Bombay or go back to Vrindavan. So I just you know, arrived early in the morning in the same day, so I was a little bit spaced out from the jet lag and everything. So I wasn't fully tuned into what was going on at that point. So I asked him, is it for preaching or is it for health? And Prabhupada said it's for health. So then I voted the same way as everybody else, that Prabhupada should go back to Vrindavan. To go back to Vrindavan meant, you know, no concerns about buildings and openings and managerial things, etc., but just looking after Prabhupada's needs whilst he was there in Vrindavan. So as soon as we made that decision, I was given, well, yeah, Tamal Krishna Maharaj got me a ticket on the last plane out of Bombay to Delhi. I flew in the night time. The next morning, I went out with the temple president, who at that time was Bhagavata Shraya Prabhu. He was an Australian devotee, and he had a friend who owned a furniture business. So we went to see him, and he had one double bed, and that double bed with mattresses of cotton twice as thick as normal, with sheets, pillowcases, etc., etc. So we'd worked out what we would need. We knew that Prabhupada would not be able to stay in the back bedroom as he had previously used it, but the whole darshan area had to be available, people coming in and out, and you know, there was more air circulation, etc. And we needed a double bed because that requirement, looking after Prabhupada, sometimes massaging him, washing him with hand cloths, etc. That was all, it needed a double bed to be able to have enough space to move around, to move Prabhupada around, and to move the devotees around. So I phoned back to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. They caught a train. Somehow or another, they managed to, the same day, they managed to get 40 tickets or so on the train, and they came to Mathura Junction, and then we picked Prabhupada up there and brought him to Vrindavan for the last time. So I was there for the last 1 month. At the end of October, I had so many pressing things. I was in New GBC, so I had to take my leave and go back to Australia. And of course, Prabhupada left 2 weeks after that. Anyway, with Bhakti Charu Maharaj, he was not there on the party when we arrived back in Vrindavan at the beginning of October. But within a day or two, because Tamal Krishna Maharaj had to deal with a continuously increasing number of doctors, a couple of Ayurvedic doctors, there was a couple of allopathic doctors, etc. So very often Tamal Krishna Maharaj couldn't actually understand exactly what was being said. There was a devotee called Satchidananda, a Bengali. He was nice, but he couldn't really kind of grasp what was needed to look after Prabhupada for getting medicines and things like this. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked Prabhupada, can we bring Bhakti Charu Maharaj, because he's the only one that I trust, you know, in gathering up all these different medicines, etc. And so Prabhupada said, yes, bring him immediately. So he arrived, I think, the 7th or 8th of October. And of course, he was with Prabhupada right up until the very last, about 5 weeks later. So Maharaj was an exceptional person. It seemed to me, as I said, that he was not coming from the same kind of background that we were anyway. And I just felt very strongly that Krishna, you know, sent him along to help look after Prabhupada in his last days. It was a service that very few people could do nicely, but he fitted, you know, completely in, and Prabhupada fully trusted him, you know, for looking after his affairs, medicines, etc., etc. So that I'm working on. Sorry, when I arrived in Vrindavan, I started keeping another diary, separate one from the one that I kept previously when I was Prabhupada's servant. And I kept a separate diary, which I'm got a working title on now. The other one is Transcendental Diary, and this new book, which will be about the same size as Tamal Krishna Maharaj's TKG's diary, that will probably take about another 4 or 5 months to get that completed and published. So what was I going to say? Anyway, yeah, I don't. It's difficult to glorify somebody that you haven't spent much time with, but Bhakti Charu Maharaj, although I knew him from when he got initiated, and since then, he was constantly preaching and moving around as Prabhupada was, so it was not easy, to kind of get together, if you like. Prabhupada's legacy was that don't stay in one place, you have to go out and preach. So that was imbibed in Bhakti Charu Maharaj's DNA, if you like. He knew what Prabhupada wanted. He had this special relationship. I'm not saying this as a speculation, but in July of 1976, we had been in New York, and we were going back from the morning walk in the car. Jayananda Prabhu was driving, and we were going back to the New York temple. And Rameshwara was in the car. I was in the car. Tamal Krishna was in the car. And so I think Rameshwara Maharaj, he asked Srila Prabhupada, he said that just as Krishna, when he makes his appearance, then a whole entourage comes with him, to enact his pastimes, etc. So is that the same as when the spiritual master comes? Yeah. Does he also have with him his own special entourage? And Prabhupada said yes. So we can see from Prabhupada's activities, not Prabhupada's dealings with Bhakti Charu Maharaj. I always thought about that statement of Prabhupada's, and I did think that at least, we may not be able to say who is part of the entourage, eternal entourage or not, but I'm quite certain that Bhakti Charu Maharaj certainly is. So I think that he came here to do a certain amount of service. Let's face it, he translated the entire Bengali works of Srila Prabhupada, the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc., etc. Huge task. But because he was so nicely situated in the mode of goodness, he was completely satisfied without any agitation, etc., etc. And I did always feel that he was one of those, if anybody's an eternal associate of Srila Prabhupada, then Bhakti Charu Maharaj definitely is. So, whatever. I don't know what else I can say. It's a great loss for us, but it's a great gain for others. Ultimately, we're all sheltered at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada. And as Prabhupada said, we'll have another ISKCON in the spiritual world. So we're waiting for that day. And I think Bhakti Charu Maharaj is definitely going to be there to receive us if any of us is fortunate enough to re-enter, the eternal pastimes, Krishna's eternal pastimes. I'm quite sure that Bhakti Charu Maharaj will be there to greet us and, assist Prabhupada eternally. So, is that all right?
Yes, thank you very much, Prabhu, for your wonderful association. And you very nicely shared the most precious recollections from your personal conversations with Srila Prabhupada. And you told you narrated many pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. The most liked one is like how these Goswamis, they used to come to meet Srila Prabhupada, and they assured him to write Srimad Bhagavatam, and the sixth Goswami will assist him. And that you told from that how one devotee, Gopal Chandra Ghosh, he reveals to the devotees that how Prabhupada told these things to him many times. And then he told about Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj that how he was he came in late 1976, but he immediately got the shelter of Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada liked him very much. You told the past time of that when Srila Prabhupada's health was not good, and to give the medicine to Srila Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked him to. Tamal Krishna asked Srila Prabhupada, should we call Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj? Then immediately Prabhupada told yes. And you told that how Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj is a very close associate of Srila Prabhupada who appeared during the continued to serve. And the proof that you gave is the talk in the morning walk talk 1976, where Rameshwar Swami
Not
Maharaj
exactly proof, but it's an
asked
indirect.
Srila, yeah, indirect indication that
Yes.
Rameshwar Swami Maharaj that asked Srila Prabhupada about this Krishna comes with his antras, and so Srila Prabhupada, you also would be having the close associates, and yes, the Prabhupada replied. So thank you very much, Prabhuji, for your kind association and sharing these wonderful pastimes and memories. And we seek your blessings to um, apply the teachings and become a loyal servant of Srila Prabhupada and continue to serve in his own whole life. We look forward to have your association at Ujjain. Whenever the situation is good, please visit Ujjain. This is one
Yeah,
of the
that's one of the
most.
regrets. Another regret that I have is that although I was in India at the time, I decided not to go to Ujjain for the temple opening. And afterwards, Bhakti Charu Maharaj asked me if I'd been there, and I said no. So I think he was a bit disappointed. Um, and I realized I should have gone for the opening of the Ujjain temple. But anyway, that's the way things are.
So whenever situation is good, Proji, please visit Ujjain. We seek your association.
Okay, so thank you all very much. I
Hare Krishna.
hope.
So yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yes, Proji.
Yeah, maybe we can do something later in the year. Let's see how things go. With all this restrictions on travel at the moment, it's very difficult. But I think this has been very useful for the devotees preaching, because now we've got all these. There's literally hundreds of ISKCON devotees that are holding these kinds of video conferences, for studying, for pastime telling, etc., etc. So I think that this has been for the devotees a bit of a freshening of the air, where we can try new methods of preaching, or take the ones that are there and properly utilize them. So let's see what happens. We may or may never get out of lockdown. Personally, I don't mind being locked down in Mayapur for the rest of my life. But yeah, let's see. Keep in touch. And if there is a possibility, I would like to come out to Ujjain, say for a week or something, and we can have some seminars on Prabhupada, introduce, devotees to more intimate insights into Prabhupada's activities.
Okay, thank you very much, Prabhuji, for
Thank
your
you.
kind words.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srila
So we
Prabhupada
should
ki jai.
express Jai. So we should express our heartfelt gratitude to Prabhuji by loudly chanting one time Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Hare.
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Rama
Rama
Rama,
Rama,
Hare Hare.
Hare Hare.
His
Jai,
Grace Hare Shari Prabhuji ki Jai, Srila
Jai,
Prabhupada ki
Hare Krishna.
Jai.
Glories to Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.